All right.
Hi, Peter Mulvey.
Hi, Mark Erelli. How you
Eh,
doing? It's good to see your face.
Oh my God. I surprisingly enjoy these digital Zooms. I mean, I guess if I had my druthers, I would like to do this in person. But since we often can't, I actually really enjoy these digital connections,
I
strangely
do.
enough.
I do too. And we were just before I hit record, we were talking. We were talking about the resolution of iPhone cameras versus laptop cameras, external cameras, sound, Scarlett, and I just have to ask, like, I think you've always been a little ahead of me in the gear curve. Like your pedal board has
Oh,
always been better, etc. But I would imagine that you, like me, sort of just resent having had to get a minor degree in like in essential what studio broadcast recording.
yeah. This whole process has been a giant learning curve,
Yeah.
and I think what I find so kind of interesting about our relationship is that we're following each other in different ways for different reasons. You've
Yes.
been a you when I was thinking about who I wanted to talk to for my Patreon backers, I was like, I got to get Mulvey because he's just been a North Star. You've been a North Star in terms of certain ways to do certain things and very
Yeah.
important things like live performance, travel, storytelling, all that kind of stuff. And then every once in a while, like you'll come back at me with like, about fashion sense or about that preamp or what are you using for your camera app? And it's like we're between the two of us, we make up one, kind of well-rounded, tech savvy artist.
I think that's fair to say. I have some questions about music that I will be posing to you.
Yeah. So, well, same here. Same here. I mean, this all started, I don't even remember how many months ago, but you were predictably on Patreon first. And I remember you called me up and your basic message to me was, Mark, just lean into it.
Yeah.
Just go for it and figure it out. And I remember I was standing out back on my deck, and I was thinking like, I don't know if I lean, I might just fall right over. And I
Yeah.
wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready, And but that's the thing about our relationship. I see you doing something, and I think, oh, that's a good idea, but I could never do that, knowing full well that in 6 months I will be doing exactly that or my version of that.
Right.
And so I have you to thank for being here. And I guess my first question for you, like, you always seem to be kind of on the vanguard of things, or at least a certain type of thing. Do you have time? Do you have trouble turning off that creative impulse and balancing it with just like normal life? Like now I'm going to the grocery store or walking the dog, or is it just all inextricably bound, 24/7, 365?
You know, of late, I I mean, first of all, I think that I've figured out recently that I'm an introvert, which sounds really weird, but I think the reason that I get on stage is so that you can all be over there. Like I love people
Yeah.
and I love relating to people, but I when I'm in a when I'm in a party, I it just wigs me out to be that close to that many people.
Mm.
I'm a little less gregarious than I think people think I am. So that's thing one, and then thing two, like I have always no, I've always kept a private life. I'm a longtime meditator now, and I have often dabbled with sort of guided meditation, but I've
Hmm.
found that I don't like it, and I don't even like a timer. I like to just be, like just be in there. And again, like I've been into bicycling for a long time, and I think recently I just realized I'm going to have to stop logging miles because that makes me think about the bicycling instead of just being there.
Man, that's such a great point. Like and I used to run into this. I've run into it in all aspects of my life. The interference of conscious thought,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Anytime I think about something, that tends to lead to a horrible idea. And it was that way. It was that way in my academics. It was that way when I used to play like competitive tennis as a. I remember my tennis coach when I was growing up was like, just don't think. Go out there and do not think. And I played my ass off, you know? And
Yep.
it's the same thing with music. Like, I will rehearse obsessively and I will come up with, I'm not really an improviser,
Hmm.
at least by choice. I come up with parts that I find musical and catchy and simple, and I'll rehearse them over and over again. I will get on the gig. I will inevitably screw them up, and I'll screw them up in my own way that kind of lets, my own foibles kind of become my own voice, you know?
Yeah.
And so I don't even know, where was I just going with? Oh, yeah, conscious thought. There you go. Um, anytime I think, it's a bad thing. So I totally know what you mean about like the kind of thinking consciously and how that interferes with the process and just
Yeah.
in the
And
process.
you and I think both of us are big fans of Paul Kohansky, like his
Yes.
musicianship and the spirit in which he plays, right?
Yeah.
He gave me this incredibly brief lesson. Um, he was overdubbing bass parts on a record of mine, and he laid down, he listened to the track, went in, made a little few notes, and then he went in, did a pass, and then he was done with the pass, and the engineer turned on the "Let's talk to the guy in the booth" button, and Paul said, "What if should we?" I smell thinking. Just roll the tape.
Yeah, I've performed with Paul many times on stage too, and one of my favorite things is that oftentimes as someone's counting in the song, Paul will go, "Wee!" You can't really
Yeah,
hear it. It's not
exactly.
on mic, but that's his philosophy. It's like, oh my gosh, I'm just like a kid in a candy shop or like a kid in a playground, like this is supposed to be fun, and we're not really supposed to know exactly what's going to happen or feel like, totally in control. And
Yeah,
that's part of the joy of it.
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, well, okay, so I actually have a question for you that's somewhat related. Like, we have an obligation as artists to try to find an audience for the work because we write these songs, right? So that they might be useful to people. And what that boils down to is marketing and branding, you
Mm.
know? And of course, marketing and branding are terribly self conscious things. And so, how,
Mm.
your art is still human. So, how did you keep that? Like, what walls did you manage to build? What shelter did you build for that little flame? And is it sort of an intentional thing, or do you just feel like your particular flame, is unassailable to the slog of of marketing the flame? You
Oh,
know?
I would not even call it a flame would be generous. I'd call it, you made this little kind of cupping the candle, kind of motion with your hands. And that's really what I feel like it is. It's like you've got this little tiny, uh, you know, tiny little candle light, and you've got to shelter it from all the things that would blow it out, whether it's external fears and external pressures, or the internal critic that says like, that's not good enough. That's
Yeah.
Dylan did it better. Whatever. Um, I do I do guard my flame in ways kind of consciously and unconsciously. So one of the things that always makes me feel better, always, maybe the only thing besides like being in nature that reliably 100% of the time makes me feel better, is to put on a record that I love and to plug in some kind of instrument or mandolin or something like that and play along, whether it's exactly the parts or just kind of add my own thing to it. That has always consoled me because it brings me back to my love of music. It brings me back to that feeling that I had when I was in high school and I was voraciously discovering and consuming
right.
new music and digging back into the roots of what came from where. And it just reconnects me to that practice. It is very much a spiritual practice. It's oftentimes a very loud spiritual practice. It's not like I'm sitting there in silence, listening for my still small voice. It's like I got two distortion pedals on and the amps on four, which is
Yeah.
insanely loud. And so that to me is one of the things that really kind of gets me back to the whole reason why I do this. But absolutely, I find the marketing, um, it's necessary, but it's utterly bewildering to me. I don't understand what makes. It's funny. I think that's why I write songs. Like, I'm just not sure that I really fundamentally understand other people, and I keep trying to through my art, through my music, but like really they're just a mystery to me. I'm probably a mystery to me when it comes down to it. I mean, I maybe that's a real insight right there, but I just I don't understand what people want from me. And I almost feel like uh or if they want anything. And I almost feel like I can't know that
Hmm.
unless they're all there sitting me down staging a, folk intervention, Mark, here's what we
Right.
want from you.
It's
Cut
still,
out all this bullshit. So I don't really know what they want from me. So all I can do is offer what feels honest and true and
right.
what feels exciting and meaningful and what I'm passionate about. And I still don't know if that's what everybody or a lot of people want, but I know that there are some people out there that it will be helpful for. And because I'm always changing, it doesn't matter if sometimes it's just a small subset of people that are digging it. I'll do something else and maybe that will resonate, with a larger subset of people, But the point is to just never let the marketing get in the it's like never let the truth get in the way of a good story. It's like never let the marketing get in the way of just doing what you love and then, finding the audience. But you're right about that. And this is something I was wondering about you, like especially during this time. I mean, we've found ways to connect, right? That aren't live performance for actual audiences. They're not the same. Everybody knows that, and it's fine. It is what it is. But I have found it hard. Like when I write a new song and I'm excited about it, which has happened several times in the pandemic. I want to play it for people, and I want to hear their reaction. They're not. It's not going to mean like if they don't react wildly, it doesn't mean I'm not going to keep that song or record it. I might go back and figure out if something needs to be honed or not, or if I play it for people and they flip out, that's a whole other piece of feedback. But we don't really get that. I mean, you get the comments section, but it's not the same on the live
Right.
stream.
Right.
So for me, that creation is inextricably linked to the reception. And it's not why I'm creating. It's not like I'm not creating just so people will receive things um, well, but I am seeking to be more than just like a voice howling in the wilderness. And I wondered if that my sense from you is you're so prolific and you're always you can talk a mile a minute. There's this like fountain of stream of consciousness of thought. My feeling of for you would be like, well, Peter's probably always creating, and it doesn't even matter all that other stuff. But is it that way for you, or do you feel like you really need to connect with that reception of the audience?
I do. I do. And that has had its costs on a personal level because every once in a while I will find myself performing at someone I love, you know. And I'm very, very fortunate in that um, I have dear friends that have waded through that and managed to find ways to tell me, because like most exuberant people, I'm easily punctured, and so that has had its costs across my life, but luckily I've found people who are able to sort of be hyper gentle about that. So thank God, because I wasn't going to change. Um, but then also, um, it is the sort of, I mean, you've laid a finger on something, which is I talk out loud more than a lot of other artists. You know, like I will put up a
Did I say
first
that?
draft of a song. Like I think out.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
better way to put it. I think
Yeah.
out loud more than a lot of other artists. Like I'll put up a first draft of a song. I'll change a title. You know,
Hmm.
it's all sort of in process to me, and a lot of my work is crude in that regard, and I'm fine with it being crude. I've even honed the crudeness at times.
Yeah.
Like I've gone back through work and made it a little more blunt and pug and colloquial on purpose. And where was I going with this? Yeah, you know what it is? Like I am America's middle child. Like I've started to realize that over time. Like I'm the kid going, why can't we all just and you know? And so I've like sailed into these times and stuck my neck out and been sort of dopey and guileless, and it's been fine. You know, uh, I don't seem to attract as many trolls as most people who are willing to stick their neck out as far as I do. And I think
Hmm.
it's partly because of my just sort of like I don't know. It's just it's sort of all in my nature. I have no idea. I have no idea what I'm doing here anymore.
No, I've gotten that sense from you that that you've kind of for lack of a better term kind of leaned into this time, and I found that to be very comforting even before I kind of found my own way with certain things. I was like, okay, it's possible to kind of find ways to keep creating, to keep vital, to keep connecting authentically, even when the main kind of way that we do that that's been hammered into us for 20 plus years now, live performance is not an avenue that we can use.
Yeah, there was a thing you did the whole ology series, which
Yeah,
I
yeah.
loved. I loved it,
Thank you.
and I think I'm somewhat of a huckster sometimes because I was like, dude, there's your Patreon. Just do
Yeah.
ology, but stick a Patreon on it, and you didn't, and I'm glad you didn't, right? Because in this day and age, I think one of the things that people liked about ology was that you were just doing it because you wanted to do it.
Yeah. There has to be some aspect of that, I think, in your creativity, uh, especially as you get older. It's maybe harder to preserve that. When you're starting out, you're trying lots of new things. The stakes are very low usually because the audience is very small,
Right.
and if you mess up or you lose money or whatever, it's usually just you. Most of the younger artists are haven't kind of settled down yet, so I think as I get older, I have to kind of really be careful to kind of keep that spirit of trying things just for the sake of trying them, because now if I want to do an ology, I got to make sure somebody's watching the dog. I got to make sure the kids don't have to be driven anywhere. I got to make sure I'm not, sucking up too much of the internet, gigabytes from my wife who's working upstairs. There's all these very real considerations for something that doesn't bring in any money or like tangible benefit per se, but it does get me in conversation with people that I respect and love deeply. And those ologies, a couple of them led to songs.
Yeah.
Now, will those songs lead to anything? I don't know. I haven't played them for anyone yet, and I haven't had a chance to record them. That's
Right.
been this whole year has been, setting aside the just deep fear about myself or my loved ones getting sick, and thank God that I was spared that pretty much completely. uh, I think that's the thing that's really challenging is that the creations are piling up. I mean, not I haven't been super prolific, but I've been able to keep working, and and yet I have nothing to show for it. There's no way to go and record them really in a way that I want to record them. There's no way
Right.
to kind of get them out. So it's just kind of this whole like, I hope I hope this is working. Is this thing on? You know, like,
Right.
and it gets harder to kind of indulge yourself in that as like I said, as you get more and more responsibilities in your life, because there are people that have to kind of hang back for a while and just let dad do his thing,
Right.
regardless of where it's going to go. And fortunately, I'm surrounded by largely patient, very understanding and loving people that kind of they understand the signs. Like when I get that look in my eye, like, oh, I should put that part on that song that I was recording. They're like, see ya, you're going downstairs.
That's great. And so you are in the basement, which explains why you can get loud sometimes.
Yeah, so that was one thing that happened in the pandemic that was really interesting is that we have a small house and everyone has been remote. And for 8 months of the pandemic, I didn't really have a place to go. I mean, I had an office, but it was on the same floor that my wife was working on, so I couldn't fire up an electric guitar, and my son was doing virtual school right above me. And so I was like a man without a country. I just did a lot of dog walking. But we ended up doing musical rooms within the house, like moving different people into different rooms. So I'm right now, my office used to be the guest bedroom. Once it became clear we weren't having guests, my wife took it over as her office. It's got no windows and it's built into the ground, like the ground slopes alongside the house. So this back wall is all underground. So it's very insulated. There's a major street right there, but I can't hear it at all.
Oh, that's great.
And so once we moved everybody around and my office got moved into this room, which has a door, which my other office did not have, it was just an open doorway, I can now leave mics set up all the time. And everything's kind of wired up. I just switch a few cables out and I'm ready to go. And one of the things that I've been really getting into is like doing these one man band kind of recordings. Like I don't do you do like doing demos? Do you
I've never done demos that way. Like
yeah,
I've
me
never laid
neither.
one part on another. So this is the first time for you. What are you using for drums?
I have a drum kit. I don't know if you
Oh,
can
yes,
see
you
it.
do. I
Yeah, I
can
have
see
a
it right
huge.
there
It
behind.
takes up like most of the room.
Right.
It's this big old '70s Ludwig that Lauren Entrust gave me, and I can't. I need it. I need it there. So I'm playing drums. I borrowed a bass from Hickman, and I do like a pretty passable, crappy bass, and I take these new songs of mine and I just imagine that I'm putting them on a record that doesn't exist, and I just like see if I can record them in this room, and that has been a real um, game changer for me in terms of mental health. But it brings up this other thing that I love to talk to artists about, because like generally when the world was the way it was, and I think a lot of folk artists are like this. We just don't have a lot of money and big recording budgets. So when we
You
go
don't
in the
say.
studio, yeah, when we go in the studio, it's this very photographic approach. It's like you get all the players together, everyone plays, you're
Yeah.
recording, and you get this snapshot. And that's actually the way that most of the classic records were made. Most of the records that we love and really admire were made by people. It's like Ani DeFranco has that lyric. It's an album like a portrait of people playing music in a room. It's like that quote. That is what I like. And now we can't do that. So rather than the photographic approach, I've been just trying to lean into the kind of like oil painting approach,
Right.
where you put down a layer and then you step back or go have dinner or do some chores or walk the dog, and you think about it and you come back and listen again and you think like, oh no, I can delete that part or mute that part, or there should be this other instrument that comes in here. And I've been really, I'll send you some of the recordings. I've been putting some of them up on my Patreon page, and I'm really in love with them. They're not like commercial grade, but I'm curious, like have you ever experimented with that kind of oil painting approach, or has it kind of been mostly photographic?
It has been entirely photographic. Um,
Interesting.
well, I mean, well, that's not entirely true. The record "There Is Another World," I played all my parts, and then the other parts were layered on top. And I played all my parts solo. And I think we also made um, Trouble with Poets that way. But in both cases, I wasn't doing the painting. Like I hired some other painter.
Right, right, right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I myself, yeah, I guess I've just never gotten into that. And yet I mean, there's some amazing work out there. Like I think of Radiohead. Like you can't make that stuff with in real time. Like
Yeah.
you have to make it out of layers. Or I guess the legend of that is that Prince. That When Doves Cry, had many,
Mm.
many parts, and then he reduced it down. Like that was his
Yeah.
thing, would be to add and subtract. But for me, no, I love working with people who do that. I can't wait to hear your stuff. Where can you get it? Can you find it on Mark Erelli's Patreon?
You can find at least one of them, and I'll be putting up tracks maybe every other month or so for people to check out. And it's funny, none of this stuff that I'm doing down here sounds like a studio creation that could only happen like through a computer. Like it all, you could, if you didn't know any better, you'd think it was, a bunch of people playing in a room. Like that's still how I come at things. But um, I guess like, producers like Jeff Lynne, who produced Full Moon Fever and Into the Great Wide Open and the Traveling Wilburys and all that stuff. And then John Leventhal, amazing producer for his wife Roseanne Cash and Sean Colvin, all sorts of amazing people. Like those guys are kind of like one man bands. If you look at the liner notes, it's like they're playing drums, bass, organ, guitars, percussions, keyboards. And I've just been kind of reading up on them in this time, and I was like, and they basically just have things wired up. And once they kind of abandon uh, needing to kind of perform everything. They loop things, and get it sounding musical. And so I've just kind of tried to embrace a whole different way of creating like that. I've done more kind of oil painting records before, like with like one other person, the two of us doing the parts. But I find that for like again for us folky singers, like we often don't get the luxury of the oil painting approach because it is you're not recording simultaneously, you're recording consecutively, so it just the studio time adds up and the zeros accrue.
Yeah. Oh my God. This actually leads me to a question that I had queued up for you, which is so, I met you first as a songwriter, and I've always thought of you as a songwriter first. But your abilities as a sideman. I've always I've always revered them and viewed them as sort of like extra dimensional. Like, I know how hard it is to just do and to create enough music to make somebody else sound better.
Mm,
And I know how intricately hard it is to add something that makes everything feel a little more spacious. Like, how do you
yeah,
add, and yet somehow, once you're done adding the thing you're adding, nothing is more cluttered than it was before. And
yeah.
I've always just thought of you as like genuinely as good as most bass players. Like a really great bass player is one of the
Oh,
most valuable musicians in the world
I'm well
because
aware.
nobody thinks about them.
Yep.
Like they and so I guess my question is, one, it seems like you are finding an outlet where you can actually combine both sides of yourself here, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then two, like, how have you juggled that? Like, has it always felt like, I guess this is the question I want to ask. Has it always felt like an asset because it has always looked like an asset to me. Your
Mm,
work as a sideman. Has
yeah.
it always felt like an asset, or have you felt at times that it kind of was a fallback net that you didn't want to have necessarily?
No, I've never felt like that. I mean, the sideman thing was a direct outgrowth of what we were talking about earlier, of just like putting on records and playing along to them.
Right.
And you know, I would put on back in like the late 90s, early 2000s, I would put on records by my friends, put on a Chris Delmhorst record and play along just to kind of enjoy that music in a different way. And then when Chris would come through town, and well, we both lived in Boston then. When I moved to Boston, she came over to hang out, and we were playing guitars in the backyard, and she was playing some songs, and I kind of just like chimed in with what I'd been playing along to on her record, and she was kind of like, "Do you like accompany people?" And I was like, maybe I would love to. I've always wanted to. So she was really the first one to kind of take me along. And I think when I started out fulfilling that sideman role, rather than it feeling like this extra thing that I didn't want, I embraced it. I overly embraced it because I didn't want people to feel like if they had me along as their sideman that they had to like put me in front of the center mic to do a song of my own, or that I had to be centered in any way. Like I was totally fine. I was still learning how to be a sideman at the time. I was learning how to put the pedals in the mix and how to play the electric guitar and wrangle an amp and stuff. And that was like, it felt like a different part of my brain when I started out. And I didn't want to be like Mark Erelli, the solo artist, at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I found it challenging. Over time, they kind of, and this is what was my hope all along, is that they would integrate. And to the extent now that I I don't think of them as doing different things. I don't think of it as like, oh, this is a sideman gig or this is my gig. I just think of like, this is a gig, and do I have to pack the merch or is somebody else packing the merch?
Right.
It's like, do I have to talk to people afterwards or does somebody else have to talk to people? Those are really the only differences. And I will say this, like the sideman thing, far from being an extra thing that I had to carry around or resented at times because of my solo, I wanted to be doing solo stuff. It saved my like musical career. Like I would not be a singer-songwriter or musician still had I not found the outlet that I get from being a sideman. I was not as suited to that solo troubadour, grind it out, 200 shows a year kind of thing that you were doing for a while, for many years there. Like I tried my hand at that. It just wasn't for me. And I like doing a lot of shows. Don't get me wrong, but I remember driving up the coast of California and just feeling so alone and just playing
Mm.
all these gigs where like nobody was coming, and I was away from my wife, and I was just like, I'm not enjoying this. And
Yeah.
and I have the best gig, a job in the world. Like I should be enjoying this.
Yeah.
What am I missing? And I realized what I was missing was like the camaraderie of friends and fellow artists. And I was missing that kind of interplay, on stage as well. And yet I couldn't really afford to bring, sidemen and stuff on my own gigs. So I was like, well, why don't I just be the sideman and then other people have to pay for it? And
Right.
it kind of worked out like that. So to me, whenever I have a sideman gig now, it's like a vacation. It's like I only have to think about music here and supporting my friend. And it is almost always a friend. I'm not really like you can't, I mean, everyone has a number, I suppose, but you can't really hire me out to like, just go play this gig. It's like, well, no, I
Right.
got too many other things that I need to do. I don't want to just play any gig. Like, and there needs to be a reason. you know?
Right.
And for me all along, the reason has been I'm just with, I'm making music with someone I love, you
Yeah.
know? And they might even be like sometimes when I first met Paula Cole, I didn't know her. When I first met Amy Helm, who I've played with just a little bit, I didn't know her. But you know, in this business and in this line of work, you become it's like trench warfare in a way. You become friends very quickly. You know, you're sharing a set of living conditions and working conditions that maybe a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah.
Um, but you understand it in each other, and so you become very fast friends. And this feeling that is very much like love, like fraternal love. Um, it can come very quickly, even just after like a few gigs, you know?
I know the precise thing that you are talking about. And I think that it is twofold. I think that it has to do with the conditions of being a road dog, and being out there. But I also think it just has to do with the language that we speak.
Yeah.
The musical language is sort of unabashed and childlike and direct and very personal.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a Chris Delmore sideman story. I lost a good friend of mine maybe 10, 12 years ago, and she happened to be coming through my town. She's like, "Hey, you want to just like do the sideman thing? I don't have anybody with me on this tour. I mean, you don't know the songs, but would," and I didn't, until she asked, I didn't realize how much I needed to do that.
Mm,
Like to play music and to play music for people and to not say anything and to not be the guy and to just
yeah.
be in the room and be part of the thing. Like that was one of the, yeah, and she and I were friends, but it dawned on me that she was like deploying this language in
Right.
a sort of a therapeutic way.
Yeah, and I think one of the takeaways that I hear there is that you don't have to be a virtuoso. I mean, I grew up idolizing, you know, David Lindley and Sonny Landreth and Dwayne Allman and Ry Cooder and Kevin Barry and Duke Levine. I, I never thought. I was like, well, they people can just hire those guys. Why would they? Why would they? And you know, for the records, frankly, they did. You know, I still don't play on like a ton of records, and those guys are amazing and can give you exactly what you want in a fraction of the time. But they oftentimes don't go on the road, and I would. So like, I wouldn't have a sideman career without Kevin Barry like only being able to be in so many places at one time. You
Right,
know,
right.
I
All
mean,
those.
I think you know started with Laurie, and then I started playing with Laurie, and he played with Paula Cole for years, and then I got that gig, and like, I mean, there's been I was up for the Mary Chapin Carpenter gig at one point. I didn't get it, but you know that was like another of Kevin's past gigs. So you know, it's like there's eh, you don't have to be a virtuoso. You just I think you have to be willing to be musical and to be and to play simply and supportingly, you
Yeah.
know. And the Beatles, like they wrote some amazing things, but like I wouldn't say any of the Beatles instrumentally was like virtuosic per se.
No.
I would just say that they were incredibly tuneful and musical, and you know they knew how to get out of the way of a great song, and that is basically the job of a sideman.
Right. I
You
know a
know?
drummer. He's played on a few of my records, Nathan Keelan, and his motto is, "I don't play drums. I play songs." It's like that's the guy. That's the guy. That's what you need.
Yeah, yeah, man. And then when you know, for people that haven't done it before, like you know, imagine being surrounded by people like that all the time. I mean, that's the way that it was for you and I. We were surrounded by that kind of vitality and that kind of love.
Yeah.
You know, common love, love of the pursuit of you know creating something beautiful and love of each other. You know, and that I mean that has been the hardest thing of this whole time for me is kind of feeling a little less connected to that, to the extent that I will call people up and out of the blue that I would have never usually called before, and just say hi, just like let's talk for 10 minutes or an hour or whatever it is. And then, at some point, as we're signing off, just like say, I love you, because I do. And I don't have any way to show it through my music right now. We don't normally have to say it,
Right.
you know?
That's a good point. And it leads me to a this leads me to a question. I have a number of friends who are women and musicians, and many of them have expressed this thing to me, which is when they first have a baby, that just the work of it falls more heavily on the woman. I like you've got two children. You
Yeah.
can't feed them from your body. That's just not a
No.
thing, and she can, and on and on. Like the way that you can't carry them, and in your and so both of the friends I'm thinking of have related to me that like in that first year when they were just in the tunnel and like dealing all the time, they would occasionally hear music and understand all of a sudden what a non-musician felt like because they hadn't like touched their instrument or sung in
Mm.
like 7 months,
Yeah.
and then they
Yeah.
hear music and just think, oh my God, this is what it's like if you can't just make it yourself.
Yeah.
And do
Yeah.
you, I
That's
mean,
beautiful. Yeah. I've felt that. I've
right,
definitely felt that.
right.
Not
Like, I feel
not
like
through children, but
this is a thing that men, like the pandemic has caused male musicians to finally begin to understand what it must be like to be like dad musicians are
yeah.
finally beginning to understand mom musicians a little,
Yeah,
in
right.
the way in the way that our common vulnerability. I actually think that's the great promise of the pandemic is
Yeah.
like it has exposed us all to our common vulnerability, and I think that's why the George Floyd moment was so different from the other moments because I think for once a whole bunch of people who had other invulnerabilities were introduced to a common vulnerability of theirs. Like we are all Homo
Yeah.
sapiens sapiens, and this virus doesn't care, and will come for us. And I think that there at the same time there's that denial of vulnerability, which has resulted in a lot of the meanness of our culture. But I actually am hopeful because that's been called into the light. Um,
Yeah, man.
Man, we are also like, I knew this was going to happen. We had this idea of talking for like 20-ish
Oh yeah,
minutes.
let's talk for 20 minutes. Is this a Mulvey 20 and or an Erelli 20, or
Exactly.
does it kind of becomes like a square, like
Can
square
I
the
tell
time.
the Can I tell the Erelli story about your poker
Please.
hands?
Oh, please,
I
please.
got to. So, Mark Erelli's audience
I'll
and
have
my
a drink while you
audience.
do it.
Mark did a tour opening for myself, and David Goodrich was the side man. And the two things I remember about that tour, at the time we were playing a lot of Texas Hold'em, and we were playing for quarters. And we were playing a fairly long, epic game, and I was like, "Man, I'm taking a beating. I'm down here." And Goody was like, "I'm down too." And then you said, "Oh, I'm down as well." And we were like, "See,
I
that
just wanted to be part of the crowd, man.
right? We're like, that can't happen. Poker is what we call a zero-sum game. Like the only way Goody and I can be down is if you have our money." And you're like, "No, I'm pretty sure I'm down." And then like 20 minutes later, you're like, "Oh, yeah, my dollar stacks actually have 5 quarters in them, not 4 quarters in them."
And the
uh,
rest of the tour, you would introduce me from stage as Mark Erelli, and my last name in Italian means one extra of something, like a
right,
baker's dozen, or yeah.
right. The Baker's dozen is the classic, really.
Oh,
And
those
then
were good times,
the
man.
other thing on that tour was Goody has always been the guy that can beat everybody in ping pong in the
Oh yeah.
room. And then like we're at a ping pong table and you just like destroyed him. And both of us were like rather, he wasn't embarrassed. He was just like, "Mark," you
Yeah.
know. Is there, is there
What have
something
you done with Mark?
is there something we should know?
Yeah, I grew up very competitive in racket sports. I mean, I was like an okay athlete, but was a pretty natural tennis player and racket sports player. So yeah, I don't. That doesn't normally really, pardon the pun, serve me well in music very much. But it is a part of my life that I've tried to connect with as much as I can without injuring myself now, which is apparently not much because
Right.
every time I get out there, I pull something that I didn't even know I had. You
Oh
know?
my God. Yes. I was having a conversation with a whole bunch of people, most of them about, my age or your age, which is just only slightly younger than me. But there were a couple of 20 somethings there, and they had sort of zoned out. And I turned to them and said, right, you should know that in about 15 years, the middle part of any conversation you have will be about what's broken lately. We call this
Yeah,
the organ recital.
yeah.
But, okay, I do have
Well, we'll spare Patreon the Oregon recital here. We don't have to get into that.
exactly. I have a question, and I mean, I guess this is the last question I want to ask, uh, but it strikes me that the common theme of a lot of your musicianship is curiosity, right?
Yeah,
Like it's absorption, right?
yeah.
You're a fairly voracious, like you're good at the trivia of things, and you're good at the texture of things, and all the moving parts of things. Do you think that that came from your science background?
I think that I was kind of always that way, just kind of inquisitive and curious, and I think I got into science because that's basically like professional curiosity, you know.
Right.
But it also, I've said this many times, like it's the same kind of pursuit as an artist. You know, you're just using a guitar or a pen and a notebook, versus like a microscope or a butterfly net. It's that curiosity and that kind of willingness to embrace mystery and the pure fact that you can plainly admit that you don't know everything and that you're
Hmm.
just trying to pay attention and learn, whether that's about the world or whether that's about someone else's heart or your own heart. I think that's where kind of like really really great, kind of empathetic music comes from. And we've seen that in any number of the artists that we love, whether that's Randy Newman or John Prine or Joni Mitchell or whoever. It's like they're all just none of those artists, none of the artists that I really love ever kind of come across as knowing everything.
Yeah.
I don't like. As soon as anyone tells me they know, everything or comes off like they know everything, I kind of start looking for the exit in the room, because it's
Yeah.
like, okay, nobody knows anything. And the longer I live, the more sure of that I become. So, for me, like music and science were both this space where that curiosity and those questions could be asked. But I think they were there before I did either of those things.
Right.
You
Right.
know, digging
Right.
in the sandbox, kind of wondering what was underneath. You know.
Right. Right. The Leonard Cohen thing about his Zen master. Have you ever heard him talk about that? They asked like what was it about that guy, and he was like, it wasn't Zen. It was just him. Like if he'd been a scientist, I would have donned a white lab coat and taken some test tubes up. If he'd been
Mm,
like he found someone that he could sort of follow into their curiosity. It's just always stuck with me, like that it didn't have to be Zen, you know,
yeah.
which
Well, and that's I think it's the same for us. Like even within music, like it doesn't have to be our songs or our
yeah,
gig or our instrument. If
right,
you're approaching it with an open mind and you genuinely love music and songwriting, like it's you can always find something compelling, more often than not. And you can always, it always leads you to this terrain that you haven't explored yet. And it will forever be terrain that you haven't explored if you're doing it right. And that to me is, one of the things that I find most rewarding about this is that it's like conversing with God or what have you. It's like there's no end. It's awesome in the truest sense of the word.
Yeah.
And I'm always kind of like, kneeling at the altar trying to figure out like, how do I unlock this? And every time you unlock one thing, it's like, oh, I got that door open. What's behind that door? Oh, another door. I see. I see. It's just turtles all the way down, isn't it? So I love that about music and art, and I try and see if I can recognize that in other aspects of my life too, to varying degrees of success.
Right.
Um, but man, I could do this all day. My computer is telling me that my son has to do a virtual piano lesson in 4 minutes, and he needs this computer.
Well,
So we could talk forever, but fortunately we have a very hard deadline here.
man, thank you so much for suggesting this. I appreciate
Ah,
it. This was a fun. I can't wait to do this in person in a
oh
car,
man.
right?
Oh God. Just going seemingly nowhere,
Right.
for hours.
Yeah. Doesn't even have to be a good gig we're headed to.
No, we could just
Let's
go in a loop, at some point, like, just take a little loop.
uh,
Yeah, man, please let it be so, when we can do it again.
all right. You guys stay safe. I'll talk to you soon. Love you much.
Likewise. Love you too.
Bye. And stop recording. Stop.